Hello, everybody. I'm Marco. I'm one of the founders and the CEO of Supersimple. And I'm going to just be talking a little bit about why I'm super into ad hoc questions, maybe more so than I'm into dashboards. And I'm going to give a live demo of using Supersimple for doing some of that stuff. So, for context, Supersimple is a BI tool that we claim is actually genuinely self-service. So what does self-service even mean? The point of self-service is for people, the ones who actually have the questions. These are generally the business stakeholders from different teams. The point is for them to get answers themselves. And the point of that isn't just to cut off data teams, but the point is that if we get the friction to asking every individual question down super low, then people just get to ask more questions. And if out of, let's say, every 20 questions, just one of them is going to have a huge insight that actually genuinely changes how you operate, then the probability of you hitting on that 1 out of 20 just gets a lot bigger if you're able to ask more. So we are primarily designed for fast-growing SaaS companies, B2B companies in particular, but this really works for everyone that has a data warehouse. And to just get into it, I'm not showing slides. This is actually Supersimple itself. Now, what we've done is we've brought together a few traditionally distinct separate workflows. You absolutely do still want to have dashboards. You want to have a place to put the sources of truth for all the things your business cares about every day. And these are crucial for sort of just keeping track of how you're doing. But as I sort of repeatedly alluded to, we think that most of the value, the vast majority of the value in data, actually comes from going deep, answering really specific questions. These are often ad hoc. And that's not just a one and done process, it's very iterative, where you have a little thought. Maybe you have a hypothesis you want to test, and you iterate towards building up a better intuition about what's going on in your business. You try a lot of different things, you backtrack, you compare. This is how data scientists have always worked. They use technical tools like Jupyter Notebooks, for example. And we try and make this possible for everyone on the team. And so you can answer any question in one of two ways. You can use our no-code UI with just these 4 no-code steps that I'm going to get into in a little bit. Or you can just ask AI. And you'll notice this will look a little bit different from your normal ChatGPT-esque products. So if we ask a question like, what's the average number of users per account and how's that changing over time? Then we do a few things in the background. We use AI to search over all of the ways your team has used data in the past, all the reports that you have saved. And if there's something perfect for you to reuse, then you should absolutely do that. In this case, there wasn't a perfect existing report, so AI actually put together a brand new one for you. So I asked for the average number of users per account in a B2B setting, and how's that been changing over time? And we see the table and the chart for it. That's fine, but that's not really the interesting bit here. The interesting bit is that, well, one, this isn't a chat interface, but two, we didn't just generate a SQL query using something like a language model. Instead, to answer your question, we used a collection of models that used our app, these same no-code steps here in the sidebar, to answer your question. And so everything that you have access to as the user, the AI has access to. And everything the AI does, it explains. So reading top to bottom, it started from looking at just all accounts, or in this case, that's what we call customers. And then it added a new column that said, this is how many users that account has. And then we just got the average of this for each month that the account signed up in. This is pretty straightforward, but I can read through this and make sure this is actually what I wanted to see. A lot of the times, you have this sort of back and forth, even with humans bringing you data. When a super experienced head of data science brings you a report that doesn't really look exactly like the numbers you expected to see, you're going to have a bunch of follow-up questions. Like, hey, are you sure that you considered this? You know that the New York data isn't synced yet, right? What exactly did you mean by activation rate? And so everything the AI did is laid out for you. And if you want to go deeper, then sure, sometimes it might be useful to use AI, but sometimes you also just want to see all the options in front of you. So, for example, we might want to break this out by the company's payment plans. Or if we ask the question about a specific company, such as which customer from the 2023 cohort had the most transactions last month, then again, we look at all the ways your team has been using data in the past. We put together a mini report for you. We can make this a little bit bigger, but you'll see that we got what we asked for. We just wanted to see one customer, one from last year that did the most last month. All the logic for getting here is in the sidebar, but because we didn't just generate the query, we also have all the context for what's going on. So for example, we know that we're actually looking at an account, not just some result of a SQL table. And so we can open this customer up. And depending on what your team cares about, you might have created a little detail view like this that shows you all the things that matter about that customer specifically at a glance. So that might be their general info and their usage patterns, and maybe their users and their onboarding statuses, or anything else that your team might care about. So this specifically is often quite helpful for teams like sales and customer success, but Supersimple is built for a lot more than that. So we think it's really important to bring all the different functions across the org together onto the same source of truth. And for them to be able to collaborate together, they need to have a shared medium. So all of these teams, they care about really quite different things, but the underlying data is always the same. It's basically how the business is doing, how customers are behaving. Different teams might just care about it at very different sort of zoom levels or granularities. Product teams might want to understand the impact of your launches or different features on things like retention or activation. And growth teams might care about basically the same things, but they care about it in the context of tracking their experiments. Sales and CS might want to understand how specific customers are onboarding or how they're getting on. And teams like XX and founders might want to just get a slightly higher level of view of how the business is doing. And when I say self-service, it doesn't actually mean 100% of questions all the time. I don't think that's a very realistic goal. There is very much still a role for data teams. But if we get to self-service for everyone else in the org who isn't a data person or maybe an engineer for 90% of questions, then that means that people are just able to answer basically an order of magnitude more questions because you can't be bothering Timo or whoever else every single day. But that frees up the data teams to then build the foundations, make sure you have a solid data warehouse in place, and make sure you've got great data models that correspond to how your users think about the business. And the data teams can then also focus on the truly hard questions, the last 10%, the things that really require you to maybe write code, maybe train some models, definitely put in a lot more work than 5 minutes of experimentation. And that sort of leads us into the data model. So Supersimple's everything really is based on this concept of data models. And these are basically supposed to be things that represent your business concepts. So if you're Uber, you might have, for example, a data model for a ride and for a passenger and for a driver. And then there's ratings and routes driven and a lot of stuff that's also all interconnected. So in a data model, you give something a name. In this case, this is the same demo account. We have a model called account, and the data in that model is coming from that table in the database or data warehouse. It could also obviously be coming from a slightly more complex SQL query, or in fact, a really complex SQL query in many cases. Then in the data models, you describe all of the fields or all of the properties of that model. This is where you give them descriptions or more helpful metadata and context. And these descriptions, these names, these are not only for your team, even though they're very useful for your team, these are also used by the AI to just make better decisions about what fields to use. The second major part of the data model is the relationships between different data models. So here we're looking at the account model, and the account model has a relation to the user model. So in the B2B setting, again, every account has many users in it. This is where you define the entire sort of SQL level join strategy. So nobody else in your team has to worry about how to join things together or deduplicate things later. And how this is used is then when you're in the product and you're, for example, looking at the list of these customers and you say, I want to add a new column, then you can do that based on this user model or this user relation. So we could count those up and get a column for a number of users for each account, or we could get the first time a user signed up in each account. Or if we narrow down to some really specific set of these accounts, such as this one that has exactly 4 users and payment problems, and we then wanted to see how many transactions they have or what their transactions look like, we could again use relations. So here you'll see that in addition to users, the account model we have also has a relation to the transaction model. So this is some sort of payment being done by those accounts. And so we could respect all of this filtering logic from before and jump to some related data, their transactions. And now we're just looking at the transactions for this one account that we filtered down to before. And we didn't have to worry about any joins, subqueries, CTs, or other SQL weirdness. A a very common case actually is that you really don't want to redefine all of these properties because you actually use something like dbt. And if you use dbt, then you can absolutely keep your existing models that already have all of these descriptions, and you can just layer on a slight layer of metadata. So as meta.supersimple, you can specify the relations there and get all the same power. Another thing that you can do in the data models is give us a little bit more semantic understanding of what's in your data. So I mentioned that we're somewhat focused on B2B SaaS companies. The reason for that isn't that we couldn't handle other types of data, but the reason is that we have a separate way of modeling out a few really core concepts that pretty much every B2B SaaS company has. And these are things like accounts or companies, users within those accounts, so you don't only have individuals behaving, and you have events that are linked to either those companies or users. You have things like subscriptions. And using the semantics bit in the data model, you can give us more context on where to look for what. And that makes it easier for your users to achieve things by clicking around, and it makes things easier for the AI. And then finally, a thing that you might want to use your semantic layer for is just defining things that are really quite complex and you need to be consistent across the board. So again, we have these transactions in this demo account, and all of these transactions have an amount tied to them. But if we wanted to calculate one of these core metrics of ours, which might be gross merchandise value, if we had a data model like this, or GMV, then instead of us having to always figure out which of these transactions we should filter out and how exactly to sum them up, then if we go into adding a new summarize step, you'll see that for the transaction model, our team has already created a metric for you or for us to use. There's the GMV metric. We can apply this, and we'll see the entire GMV across all of our users, or we could break this out in any way you'd like. So this is not only usable when you're just looking at a list of transactions, but also everywhere else where you actually have access to transaction data. So as we saw in the data model, all of our accounts are related to some transactions. And so if we're again looking at a list of these or looking at a list of these accounts, we want to add a new column from the transactions relation, then we can actually get the GMV definition in here. And so every single place where you need to calculate it can use the same definition set by your data team and handled in source control. And now when it comes to metrics, then one of the most popular things, I think in the last year in the data space has been metric trees. And we worked a bunch with these, and we realized that sometimes both for metric trees, but also in general for exploring data, it makes sense to lay things out a bit more spatially. Yeah, I see Timo is getting excited about metric trees. He hasn't seen this. So you can switch any exploration over to a canvas view, which is basically an infinite canvas like you might see in something like Figma or Miro. And here we have a really basic example, maybe too basic for Timo to be happy, but we end up at GMV here at the top, which then breaks down into things like average transaction value, monthly active users. Monthly active users itself has an input metric that's not a direct impact of days from sign up to first chart, which is a activation metric. Again, anything that you see on Supersimple, you can click on and see the exact definitions for in the sidebar. You'll also see that I intentionally left a little spot blank in here so we can fill that in real quick using AI for the third time. And again, you can always switch between the more structured view, the sort of notebooks, and the canvas. And we can hit a new block in here and ask for something like the cumulative number of users per month. Again, our AI will look through all the ways you've used such data in the past. It'll hopefully give you a little report real quick. We'll accept this. And we'll see this is the cumulative user count indeed going up. Let's get rid of the table and actually go back into the canvas view. Drag it in here. And we'll see all of our other metrics actually have a big number shown in the middle. So let's add that real quick. So on this chart, let's show the cumulative user count as a big number. Let's add a comparison. And this will also let us do a quick sanity check. So this metric says we had 289 new users in the last month. This metric went up by 289. That looks good. So we might want to then link these things up and be happy. And now finally, some of you are probably pretty technical. And sometimes you do need to go really deep into some weird, raw stuff using something like SQL. And so not only do we just give you boring SQL blocks, we also let you use all the other no code and AI tooling on top on the results. So if I ran a query like this over here, then I don't just get this table back, but I can use all of the charting, all of the no code steps, and all the AI capabilities to go deeper. But what might be even cooler is I know a lot of you like Python. And in our Python blocks, you can actually use an internal Supersimple package to bring in data from any data model or save the report and then do anything you want with it, really. So here, for example, we're just fetching all accounts and doing some basic stats on them. And then to finish this off, to make it like way too fancy and overkill, if for some reason you want to use an infinite canvas to use matplotlib in Python, then you can totally do that as well and draw super duper custom charts or do any other custom logic like training models right inside of this. So step one, you really want to bring everyone together onto shared definitions. You want to have both all of the data in one place in your warehouse, and you want to just get all the different teams together so that they can collaborate. Step two, I'm a little bit biased, but I would argue Supersimple is a pretty excellent way of doing that, and arguably by far the best for self-service. And then when you do get to true self-service, people will just ask more questions, even more questions than they're doing right now. And as this ramps up, people build up a better intuition about the business, people make better decisions, and hopefully that leads to bigger wins. So hey, that was Supersimple. Really quickly. Thanks for listening. I see Timo has one question in that chat right now. Can I save and share these blocks so that others can build on top of it? Absolutely. So you have a few different ways for that. So if you want to share some, or if you want to save some core definitions, such as what I showed with the GMV, then this is something that you might actually want to have your data team handle in the data model files. So these are YAML files that you would put into source control, handle in something like GitHub, and then deploy to Supersimple through CI. But then, just like any dashboard or other report, you can also save things for future reuse. Looks like that's it for questions right now. So, thank you so much for listening. Check us out at supersimple.io and have a good one.